And David will put up his presentation.
So can you see that?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. I'll be talking about how we advocated to access to a novel therapy. And I'll be talking about 10 strategies for success. Now, I'll be talking about emicizumab or Hemlibra for hemophilia A in Canada. But I think the principles that I'm talking about really apply to any new therapy or any new way of delivering a therapy, not only in hemophilia, but also in other disorders. So if you have thalassemia, sickle cell disease, I think the principles of what I'm talking about are still apply. And we know there's lots of really exciting therapies in the pipeline for thalassemia and sickle cell disease, as well as hemophilia, which will be coming along in the next decade. So I think it's really important to be able to advocate for access for those who need it. And this is, oh, there we go. So just a bit about Canada for those who don't know it. It's a bit of a complicated country in that we have 10 provinces, and then Quebec is its own separate province. And that means we have two blood systems, so one for Quebec and one for the rest of Canada. So we have to do everything twice. We have to advocate for in Quebec and then separately for the rest of Canada. And then drug approvals are a federal responsibility, the federal government for the whole country, but health delivery is up to each of the 12 or the 10 provinces and 3 territories. So that complicates things even further. A bit about our health system. So as I said, regulatory approval. So the approval of a new drug is done by Health Canada for everybody. But in terms of the assessment of a new health technology, so whether a new technology should be introduced and funded by the government, well, we have one system in Quebec called INES and a different system for the rest of the country called CADIF. They only make recommendations. So then decisions on whether people will get access to a new drug, well, in Quebec, it's the Ministry of Health, and in the rest of Canada, it's the combined ministries of health in those 9 provinces and 3 territories. So again, 2 decisions. And finally, in terms of delivery or distribution of a new drug, in Quebec, it's our blood system, Hemo-Quebec, and then in the rest of the country, Canadian Blood Services. So my key strategy number 1 is people really have to understand how things work in a country. So who approves drugs, who evaluates drugs for the funding purposes, who advises them and how, and certainly patient groups and patients should be involved in that process. They should be advising governments about these new drugs and how they will change their lives. And then finally, who decides what drugs are approved? And then finally, how are the drugs delivered? So again, a bit about hemophilia care in Canada. It sounds a bit like what you're describing in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have factor replacement with prophylaxis for those with severe hemophilia A and B. We have a very good network of comprehensive care centers. But about 5 years ago, extended half-life factor 8 and 9 were introduced. These have a longer half-life. You don't need to take them as often. But in Quebec, that's still very restricted to a few exceptional cases. But in the rest of Canada, those products are available to all. And in terms of per capita use, it's around 7 in Canada, which is sort of in the middle of the road of developed countries. We don't have a high use of factor concentrates. So this was the situation before emicizumab came along. So this will be a story of delays and being behind many other countries in access to emicizumab. But in terms of the regulatory approval by Health Canada, we were not delayed. So August 2018 for patients with inhibitors, and almost a year later for the patients without inhibitors. This was really the same timing as in the other big jurisdictions like the US FDA and the European Medicines Agency. That's not where we fell behind. So our first advocacy effort was getting access for those with an inhibitor. So if you know care for those people, it's very difficult and not very good. Here in Canada, we use factor 8, but also factor 7A and the bypassing agents. It's extremely expensive and not all that effective. So emicizumab, because it's a subcutaneous injection and works even with those with inhibitors, it really had a huge amount of promise. And so the first effort was to get that approved for patients with inhibitors who really had the greatest need. And so we made submissions. The Canadian CHS is our Hemophilia Society. We made submissions to Canadian Blood Services and Hemo-Quebec. And so we presented all of the research data on emicizumab. We presented data on the quality of life of patients with inhibitors, which wasn't very good. We presented written and video testimonials from the parents of children who are using emicizumab in clinical trials. I remember one parent whose child was in the hospital for weeks and weeks and weeks on end with an ankle bleed that wouldn't stop, and finally got access to emicizumab on a clinical trial on a research basis. And within 8 weeks, he was home and playing hockey with his father in the driveway. So really, just a huge change, a life change for these people. We made references to the international health technology assessment reports, which are also very positive in terms of introduction of emicizumab. And probably most importantly, we did a budget impact analysis. How much would it cost to introduce this drug compared to the drugs that were already being used? And we found that we would be able to save the health system $48 million per year for a more efficacious, life-changing therapy. So this really was a bit of a no-brainer. So we thought we had a really good, evidence-based argument, a win-win situation, better care, and budget savings. But even though we did all the good advocacy work, we made submissions to the agencies, letters to the ministers of health. We met health officials in all 10 provinces. We talked to our members about this. We talked to the blood services, CBS and Hemo-Quebec. Nevertheless, there was no decision for 9 months, even though each month of delay was costing the health system $4 million and providing inferior care. So we had to change strategy. So we found a compelling story. A boy in Nova Scotia who had inhibitors and a very severe case, and his drugs were costing the health system in Nova Scotia $6 million a year. This made no sense. And we worked with the family and a journalist to facilitate this story in Canada's national newspaper. So I think that's my key strategy number 3 is if necessary, make the story public. Tell compelling personal stories. This one was really, very strong because we were showing that the governments were wasting money and providing inferior care. So that appeared in the newspaper on May 5th, 2019, and we had a decision in Quebec 4 days later, and a decision in the rest of Canada 3 weeks later. So these decisions would have been made eventually anyway. This drug was going to be introduced eventually, but the fact that we were able to put a boy like that on the front page of the newspaper speeded up the decisions for sure. So that took 9 months. We thought it was too long, but it turned out to be actually quite quick compared to our advocacy effort number 2, which was getting access for those without an inhibitor. So this was not an easy case to make, because as the people with hemophilia on the call know, we do have pretty good products for hemophilia A. The factor concentrates are quite effective. They're quite burdensome in terms of IV infusions, but they work. So there's the budget savings would not have been as great. So it was going to be more difficult to show the benefit in care, and it was going to be more difficult to show any cost savings. There was less dramatic improvement in the health outcomes. But we felt that this was a really important advance, and it needed people needed access. So the health technology assessment groups went through three actual assessments. Quebec did 2. in a row, both negative. You'll see the results, and the rest of Canada did one as well. So we were involved in that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the key strategy number 4 is to be really familiar with the health technology assessment landscape in your country, and what's the consultation process, because you should be able to make well-researched, credible arguments to them and have your voice heard in that assessment process. So to prepare for that, we did an online survey of our hemophilia A patients, and we were able to get 52 respondents from across the country. And we asked the same questions that the health technology assessment bodies ask when they do consultations. So how does hemophilia A impact your life? What's your experience with current treatment? And what improvements are you looking for in a new treatment? So that information was a part of our submission to CADTH. And so my key strategy number 5 here is, don't wait for research data. Collect your own data on the patients and the caregivers' lived experience and their hopes for improvements. Analyze it and present it to decision makers. So you as a patient organization can go out and collect that information, especially now with online surveys. It's much easier than it used to be. So find out what your patients are living through. So these are some of the questions we asked. We asked about their disease experience. I won't go over all the answers, but you see, out of 52 people surveyed, 15 were limited in their normal activities of daily living, and 12 worried about breakthrough bleeding. So this is the kind of thing that we could present to the government and say, this is the experience of people today with their current treatment. We asked them about what they thought about their currently available treatment. And we found out how often people infuse with IVs. So you see that a lot of those patients infused every day, or 4 times a week, or every second day, or 3 times per week. So this is something I don't think governments understand. They think of medications as a pill, and it's pretty easy to take a pill, and people forget often to do it. But think about having to do an IV infusion every day or almost every day. That's a much bigger burden on people. And so 24 of the 52 people said they had difficulty accessing veins. So that's a big deal when you have to do that every day or every second day. We asked about their current treatment, and the responses varied. There was some people were very satisfied, and some people not satisfied at all. And certainly people were looking for something that had a longer half-life and something which could be given less frequently. And then we asked what they're looking for in terms of improved outcomes. So longer lasting treatment, less frequent administration, and better protection from bleeding. No need for venous access. And emicizumab provided all of those things. We also worked with the Association of Hemophilia Clinic Directors of Canada, who did their own survey of physicians who were using the drug in clinical trials. And they reported and shared the positive results, which we could use in our submission. So here I think perhaps key strategy 6, and perhaps the most important of all, is to create a strong, unified front between the patient association and the physician group. If the patients and the physicians are saying different things, you really have no hope of success. But if you have a strong, unified front, if you're in agreement about what should be done, you have a much greater chance of success. We also presented in our submissions data from PROBE. Some of you may have heard of PROBE. It's patient-reported outcomes, burdens, and experiences study. So it's a study available to all countries who are members of World Federation of Hemophilia, whereby they can collect information on the questions that doctors don't ask. Questions such as, how much pain are you in? Do you have difficulties with activities of daily living? Do you have to use mobility devices? Are you working full-time or part-time? Have you had to stop work because of your condition? So this was information. You can see by the numbers there that people with severe hemophilia A had much more problems than the people in the control group from the general population. So we were able to show governments that even though you think you've got these great products, factor VIII concentrates, still people with hemophilia A have a much poorer quality of life compared to the general population. And we also, even though it wasn't asked for by the health technology assessment groups, we did our own research, collected all the latest research studies that were published, and presented those as well. And the first one you see, factor VIII prophylaxis does not fully protect against joint damage. Sooner or later, people with hemophilia A on factor VIII prophylaxis will develop joint damage. So we thought that emicizumab provided a chance to avoid that in the future. We also provided information from other countries. So here you have a sample of 4 countries which had already introduced emicizumab for non-inhibitor patients, and the dates and the restrictions if there were any. So key strategy number 7, show international precedents, especially if you can show precedents from your immediate region. So from the Caribbean or from countries that are close to you or similar to you. So despite all that great work, I think it was great work on the behalf of our society. The Quebec HTA came back in December and said, no, should not be offered. And they gave their reasons, such as the study size being too small. And this is a problem for all kinds of diseases that are rare. By definition, the study sizes are going to be very small. It's not like cancer or arthritis or diabetes where you have thousands and thousands of patients that you can study. And so they rejected the studies that were done by the manufacturer and said more data was needed. So we objected, and we asked the company to reapply, to resubmit, and they came back with the same recommendation to refuse, to recommend that it not be offered in Quebec. They said there was weak methodology in the studies, and studies were biased, and there was no good comparator to other drugs. We thought they actually were fairly incompetent as a health technology assessment body. The HTA and the rest of Canada was a bit more positive. They recommended that it be made available for people with severe disease, but only under the care of a hemophilia specialist. That's okay, but only if less costly than the least costly factor VIII. Well, our factor VIIIs, we have 6 or 7 of them, and their prices vary. And the least costly is actually quite cheap. And so there was no way that by comparing to the least costly factor VIII, they would be able to come in a budget neutral way. So that forced us to do a complete budget analysis. So we found out much as we could about the prices in Canada and the potential savings for inhibitor patients, put it all together into a report, and concluded that at a cost of X, emicizumab could be introduced with no budget impact. We shared that with the company. So it was encouraging them to come in at a cost of X that would be budget neutral, and with governments and blood services. So two more strategies: work ethically with the manufacturer to achieve common goals. So they want to introduce their drug, and if we think it's a good drug, we want them to introduce it. And we can do things together without revealing things that we're not supposed to, without revealing secrets, without revealing confidential information that can further those common goals. And I think key strategy number 8, and this is a hard one, is to try to understand the full budget impact of what you want. And don't always believe what you're told. Governments will say, oh, no, we can't do that. It's too expensive. Follow the money. In this case, we followed the money, and we showed governments, no, it was actually, we could introduce these products either with savings for inhibitor patients or in a budget neutral way for the non-inhibitor patients. We also did a letter writing campaign. So we kept our members informed and involved, and we did an online letter writing campaign to the ministers of health and to people's local members of the legislature. And it was really popular. People really jumped on the bandwagon, and we had 10,000 letters sent to ministers of health in the first month of the campaign. We even had a bit of a competition between our 10 chapters, our provincial chapters, to see who could send the most letters per capita. So I think that's key strategy number 9 is to inform and involve the patients and the caregivers in your advocacy efforts. You need to help them to make their voices heard. And people, politicians listen to the population more so than they listen sometimes to doctors and officials. So certainly make your voice heard. So in the rest of Canada, we worked with the hemophilia doctors on a common position, and we communicated that to Canadian Blood Services. We wrote letters to all the ministers of health. We had really good support by some of our members who raised the issue in the provincial legislature, and personal contacts. And we have someone on the line from PEI. PEI went and met with the minister of health and got him to be a leader with his other provincial ministers. So the results of all of that work, finally, after, let's see, 2 years, because the product was licensed in June of 2019. So more than 2 years later, the province and territories agreed to add emicizumab to the formulary, make it available to those with less than 1% baseline factor VIII, which is about 95% of severe cases, with no restrictions regarding age. So the 5% of people who have severe bleeding phenotype but are above 1% factor VIII, we're still working on that. We haven't yet achieved access for them. And the transition started very soon after that decision. We've been going for a year and a half now, and about 2/3, 65% of all the severe hemophilia patients have now switched from factor VIII to emicizumab.
To what?
In the rest of Quebec, it was more difficult because of those negative recommendations from the health technology assessment body. But we worked with the hemophilia doctors, again, to critique the flawed report. We got them to write a letter to the Minister of Health in support of access. And we worked behind the scenes with the Quebec hematologists, not the hemophilia doctors, but the other hematologists. With the Quebec Ministry of Health, we sent them new research. And we actually had someone who had some close connections with the political staff of the Minister of Health and with the Deputy Minister. And we sent the newspaper and television stories when they occurred. So I think that backroom lobbying was perhaps just as important as some of the public efforts. So that's really the key strategy number 10, is to nurture relationships with key stakeholders, whether they're physicians or government officials or the procurement bodies. And finally, we had a success in Quebec. Despite the negative recommendations, the Quebec Ministry of Health gave in and instructed Hemo-Quebec to negotiate a fair price with the manufacturer that would be budget neutral. And just over a year ago, Hemo-Quebec announced that all those with hemophilia A needing prophylaxis, severe and moderate, would have access starting April 1st, 2022, and that transition is well underway. Now, there were barriers to our success at the time, and they're continuing. So first, with regards to the non-inhibitor patients, the improvement in health outcomes were less dramatic than with the inhibitor patients. It was, I think they were certainly significant, but not as easy to demonstrate. There was a perception by health officials that hemophilia has been solved, and we don't agree with that. There was a perception, and it was a false perception, of a high budget impact. They thought it would be way more expensive, and we showed them that it wasn't. We also have a very inefficient federal system in Canada with 10 provinces and 3 territories. It's very difficult to get them all to agree on a decision. So we have built-in delays in adopting innovative technologies. We're not very good at it. And I would say that HTA bodies are unable to really properly review drugs for rare diseases, not just hemophilia, but for many rare diseases, because the studies are so small, and they dismiss the studies as invalid. And this all happened during the period of COVID, and I have to say health authorities were completely distracted by COVID, understandably. So just to repeat the 10 keys to successful advocacy, and really this is very important, develop a strong evidence-based case. It's not enough just to tell us a sad story. It's not enough to show that people have a need. You have to develop the evidence. show international precedents, collect your own data. You can start doing this right away, even before you have an advocacy campaign. You can start collecting data on what is your patients and the caregiver's lived experience, and what do they hope for in terms of improvements. So you'll have that information ready when you need it. Create a unified front between the patient association and the physician group. Understand the full impact of what you want, the budget impact. Don't believe what you're told and follow the money. Nurture relationships, and this is in the long term. Get yourselves on as part of government committees. Get to know them so that they know you and trust you. So nurture those relationships. Be very familiar with the health technology assessment, the payer landscape, and what their consultation process is. It may be they have no consultation process. That's quite common. So you need to try to find a way to be consulted. Say that this is, normal that patients be consulted on these decisions. Prepare your submissions, make them do good research and make them credible. Work with the manufacturer. Now we don't have exactly the same goals, but you can certainly share information with them. They can share research information with you, and you can work towards those common goals. Involve and inform your patients and the caregivers in your societies. Make sure that they are aware of what you're doing on their behalf, and help them to make their voices heard. And if necessary, and it's not always necessary, but it can be, make the story public. Tell a compelling personal story. So that's a very quick overview of those efforts over really 3 years. All of the documents that we used and submitted to governments are available in English and French. And you have the websites there where you can have access to all those documents. You see there's all the reports that went to the HTA bodies, to the ministers of health, to the physicians. We did a webinar for our members. We had a Q&A about Hemlibra, letters to politicians, and our communiques. And I guess ending up, most important strategy, don't give up. If you're persistent, you have a good chance of success. So I'll stop there, stop sharing. And happy to take any comments or questions. Back to Michelle.
Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. So what I'd like to do now is basically just open it up for question and discussions from participants. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. And if you click on the reaction button on your Zoom screen, you can actually raise your hand. It might be easier if many people at the same time want to ask a question, so you can raise your hand too. And so what are your questions or comments or any thoughts you might have?
Someone has to go first.
And you can also turn on your camera at this point if you want.
Hi, good night. Not so much a question, but rather like a compliment to say, well, thank you so much for advocating and for not giving up. It does take a lot of drive to continue after all the obstacles you'll face. So it is appreciated far and wide.
I think if you know you're right, if you know that you're really proposing something which is going to make a difference in people's lives, you shouldn't give up. And it may take longer than you think, but eventually you'll be successful.
Good night. Good night.
Yeah, Robbie?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned that the prophylaxis causes joint problems. Is that something that that's like across the board, or it's
Yeah, I mean the studies show that even with very aggressive prophylaxis, it's far better than on-demand treatment. But sooner or later, when you're in your 20s or your 30s or your 40s, people will have damaged joints. It's not a perfect treatment. And so that's, I think, what the research is showing. So, you know, if the government says, well, you have factor VIII, don't worry, it's, you know, this is the solution to all your troubles. I don't think it is. Number one, emicizumab, I think, is more effective in terms of bleed prevention. It prevents all those microbleeds that people have, which don't necessarily get diagnosed as a bleed. And secondly, it's much less burdensome in terms of administration because it's subcutaneous versus and less frequent compared to, you know, frequent factor VIII IV infusions.
Would you say, based on the success of Canada to obtain more product, that would mean the company will be producing more, and if they're producing more, will it benefit other countries where their production, because of more production, they might drop their prices, so we could claim that the product might be cheaper in the future, that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, well, certainly the factor VIII prices and even factor IX prices have gone down dramatically in the last decade. Here in Canada, some of our factor VIII products we're paying 10% of what we paid a decade ago. Factor IX, maybe we're paying a third of what we paid a decade ago. That's because of competition from other factor VIII products, but it's also competition from emicizumab, and it's also more companies producing more products. We also have a good tender process here, where the companies are put in competition with each other, and that brings the price down. I know in the Caribbean and Latin America, you have a sort of a consortium with the countries in Central America and the Caribbean to try to purchase factor products together. So you're, instead of buying just a small amount for, say, Trinidad and Tobago, you're buying products for 10 or 12 countries. So I certainly encourage you to pursue strategies like that. The more you can do to bring down the price, you know, the more you'll have sufficient quantities to use, you know, to have aggressive prophylaxis.
One final question. You said that there was this false narrative that because of the Hemlibra, that they cured hemophilia. That false perspective. Would you think that would have echoed into any sort of research company thinking about taking this a little further and improving the Hemlibra, improving any further treatments that could, just like there's a mile between factor VIII and the Hemlibra, to take something to put a stop to any further research to produce any product that would be the same distance apart with the Hemlibra and anything in the future we could actually cure the factor, the hemophilia.
Well, the false narrative wasn't about emicizumab being the cure. The false narrative was that factor VIII was the cure. That's what governments, because it had been around so long and we had prophylaxis, and we had good treatment centers, they had the impression that things had, you know, improved to the point where no more improvement was necessary. Emicizumab certainly is an improvement. And I can tell you there's a second company, Novo Nordisk, which is developing a super improved emicizumab. So it's the same principle. It's called MIM8, MIM8. It's still in clinical trials, but it's looking very promising. And they're claiming, we'll see if it works out, that it's more potent. So emicizumab, people achieve a factor VIII level. It's about equivalent to, say, 15%, constant 15% factor VIII. This is supposed to be higher. So is it 20, 25, 30%? I don't know. But that's really promising in that there could be a better emicizumab, and that will create competition as well and bring prices down and make them more accessible. So all of that is good. So yeah, it's very, very promising.
Thank you very much.
So Adam had a question.
Yeah, awesome presentation, David. Of course, I was on the fight with this as well, and it's actually great to see the work that we put in and come together. I'm just curious, so since we submitted all that data and did our proposals, were we required to send any information back to the government in our lobbying efforts, or was that all just taken direct from clinic?
In terms of how things have worked out in the with
Yeah,
the
just like our
introduction?
success rates that were at 65%, and how well it's actually been doing for the community.
Yeah, well, CBS is certainly gathering information as to how many people have switched. It's only been a year and a half.
Yeah.
So in terms of health outcomes, I think we're just starting to see the research coming out now, showing, for example, number of bleeds per year for those patients, showing how their quality of life has changed in terms of, absenteeism from work or use of pain medication, or so that still needs to be done. We needed a certain amount of time from the beginning of the introduction, but I think now is the time to start showing that. And it's a good point, Adam. You ask for something, you get it. You really need to do your homework and follow up and show them that their decision was a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
I can maybe just add, Adam, that during rendezvous, we're going to be having a session because some other countries are more advanced along the road.
Yes,
they have more data now to present in terms of the impact. So that will be presented during rendezvous in May.
And we're behind. We're probably a year or 2 years behind some other countries. So if we have a year and a half of data, countries like Ireland and the UK and the US, they're now 3.5 years into this. So there's a lot of data coming out with real world evidence.
yeah, because of course, if we were to start our lobbying efforts now, say as Trinidad and Tobago, we'd be taking a lot of that information on our success stories as well, rather than why we need it initially, right? Comparing success stories and how beneficial it actually is to the community, and we can take that and turn that into lobbying.
Yes and no, because when we did this work, the health technology assessment bodies only accepted clinical trial data. They did not accept any real world evidence from other countries. So that's a message for everybody here, whether it's thalassemia or sickle cell disease. You need to convince your authorities not just to look at the small studies done by the manufacturer when a drug is going through clinical trials, but other countries have already adopted these therapies. Go get the real world evidence, which is even more valuable because it's real world. It's not the sort of the limited perfect conditions of a clinical trial. It's how this thing really works in real life. So that's another battle, is to get these agencies to look at this other kind of information, as you suggest.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. And just so for people to be aware, in Trinidad Tobago, our national conference, which is happening early May, is not going to be broadcasted live, but we are going to be recording many of the sessions. So this session I was telling Adam about real world evidence and what's going on in other countries will be filmed and will be available on our website after our conference. So you're welcome to visit the CHS website, go to our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see some of these recordings for some of those sessions. So yeah, so anyone else? Still no questions in the chat. So I invite you to ask your questions live by simply unmuting yourself or raising your hand.
I remember he mentioned one of the first steps you all made was to do some surveys, and you were asking some quality of life questions. So I was wondering if those questions were sort of they were open-ended, or were they on a given metric?
They were completely open-ended questions, and then you saw when I presented, we regrouped all the similar answers and counted them. So I think, and that's how the health technology assessment bodies ask as well. They don't give multiple choice. They really want it to be open-ended and get people to really say what they feel and what they think.
Yeah.
And it's really quite simple. All those from the HTA bodies, it's very similar from country to country. What is your life? What's your lived experience? What's your experience with your current treatment? What are you hoping for in terms of improvements? The probe questions are a bit different. I talked about a study called Probe, which looks at quality of life, how hemophilia A and B affect activities of daily living. I don't know if you've talked about Probe in your twinning project, but that's something that you can look into. It's free and it's online, and it's really can give your country some valuable information about your own situation.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot.
Hi, good night. I had a question regarding your research in terms of getting information from the patients. So you said you did an online survey out to all the hemophilias and then gathered their information to form your data.
That's right.
Am I correct?
We were actually focused on hemophilia A because we knew this new product was coming along, and so we put the survey on SurveyMonkey, which is online, and then we publicized it using I think we have a Facebook page, and we asked our chapters to use their email list to tell people about the survey. We got 52. 52 is pretty good, but we have 1,000 patients, so it could have been much better. But if you have good connections with your patients, it's much easier to present the data too. If you use paper and pencil, you have to go through all the paper surveys, and it's really quite time consuming. Whereas online, all that gets done for you, and it's much easier to compute.
Okay.
What other questions you have? We still have some time, so.
Hi, good night, everyone. This is Arnold John here. Concerning like the success rate with Hemlibra, right? Like patients previously, like my age who had mature and have deformity. Since Hemlibra, is it possible for them to have any corrective surgery, or based on your research, or what was the finding if people could now do surgery where could have not been previously done because of the fear of bleeds? But because of the availability now of Hemlibra, is it that they're considering that to do corrective surgery on like mature persons like my age or even around my age? So
Okay, I think I understand the question. First of all, Hemlibra, emicizumab, is, at least here in Canada, is only for people with severe hemophilia A, not for mild and moderate. That may come in the future, and it's certainly for all ages. So I know people who are in their 50s and 60s who had inhibitors, and they were not in good shape at all because of joint damage, and it's changed their lives around. They've gone on to have corrective surgeries. If it's major surgery, you'll definitely need factor VIII with Hemlibra. You can't, doesn't protect enough to protect you in major surgery or major trauma. But a lot of people with very minor surgery get by just with Hemlibra, don't need extra factor VIII. So minor dental procedures or other minor procedures like that, in many cases haven't used extra factor VIII. But for major surgery, you would need extra factor VIII.
yeah, thanks very much.
Did that answer your question?
More or less, yeah, did answer the question, because I want to know like if people could do surgery which would have been very risky prior to Hemlibra, and if it like a little more acceptable risk to take because of the availability of Hemlibra.
Well, in terms of risk, there seems to be no risk in combining Hemlibra with factor VIII.
Okay, no problem.
So Simon was asking a question, then Adam has his hand raised. So Simon, did you want to ask your question?
Hi, good night. And my question is, my son is on prophylaxis and he has been, it has been doing well, but I kind of worry, like, would he get inhibitors at a faster rate by taking the medication, like, the twice a week or whatever? My main worry is inhibitors because it's just a fear
Right.
having hemophilia type B. The A is the more common one. So I worry. So sometimes I would ask him, instead of giving him the factor twice a week, I'd ask
Well,
him if he could make it without the factor twice, and then if he could do it once. But that's just as a
No,
fear for parents.
yeah, inhibitors develop normally in the first, let's say 50 infusions. So usually that's before the age of 2. So if your son is older than that, and he's had multiple infusions of factor 8, it's extremely rare that he would develop.
It's factor 9 he gets in.
Factor 9 is even rarer. If he's getting factor 9, hasn't developed an inhibitor, he won't.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't worry. And the frequency is not going to, if he's supposed to get it twice a week, he should get it twice a week, not once a week.
Appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, Adam, your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Arnold, very similar. I know some success stories of youth that have kind of made the switch. And, from my experience working with youth, there's always a big issue of, I want to go and I want to play with my friends, or, you feel held back by, having a bleeding disorder. But there's been some success stories that I've heard of youth actually going out and playing sports, maybe like hockey. Not saying I would suggest that, but they're living more of a normal life now where, they can take a bump, and normally you would say, oh my God, I have to go and infuse and this is going to be worrisome for me. But all of a sudden that's taken care of. And, it's not always about major surgeries. It's just that you can live life a little bit more normal, and you don't have to be so cautious about things constantly, that you can go out, you can fall down and get up and keep on running, that it's not the end of the world. So it kind of works on both ends, that it's still really successful.
Yeah, Adam's right. I wouldn't recommend rugby or American football to anyone, let alone someone with hemophilia. And emicizumab won't protect you from everything, but it certainly does reduce the risks.
And interestingly enough, during Rendezvous, we've invited a high-level athlete to come and talk about his experience, because he's been on Hemlibra, and also the physiotherapist will be actually addressing that very point about the efficacy of these medications for these athletes, and what are the do's and don't do's, and so on. And so they'll be actually covering that topic. So
I think Steve has a question.
Steve, exactly. Steve, you raise your hand. You unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on David mentioning the family here on PEI that had lobbied the Minister of Health to have Hemlibra available. And I know in talking with them, it's made a tremendous difference in their sons' lives, and they're able to do a lot more activities and stuff like that. And I think even I believe it was last summer, they had invited the Minister of Health to one of their soccer games, and he had attended and watched it, could see firsthand, the difference that it's making. And I know sometimes when you're dealing with treatments like this, you're looking at the X's and the O's, but sometimes it's nice to see firsthand the difference that it makes in people's lives, and allowing them more freedom, and because it's like Adam said, I mean, it's hard sometimes when you're growing up and you want to take part in these activities and aren't able to. And I mean, the first thing is to limit the bleeds and limit the damage that's done. But then on the other hand, it's also great to be able to live a more normal life, I guess. And that's kind of one of the goals as well. And it's funny when you're talking about hockey and stuff. I have moderate hemophilia B, and I played hockey from the time I was 5 until the time I was 50. So took a few bumps and bruises over the years, and probably paying for it now, but I wouldn't really change it too much. But I mean, I think it's great. You know, the emphasis now, like, I mean, when I was younger, the emphasis was on treating a bleed, and now it's more on preventing a bleed. And I think, you know, definitely a big change there, and a tremendous step in the right direction for sure. And hopefully this generation, as they age, they won't have the problems that you know, my generation does getting older. Anyway, I just wanted to commend David on his efforts with Hemlibra, and you know, also wanted to add to Adam's comment there on how important it is to let the government know, you know, give them some feedback on how things have went and how, you know, successful the drug is and how it's affected people. And, you know, hopefully the next time around when, you know, the government is approached and given information, especially on behalf of the Hemophilia Society, that they take a little more note and say, okay, well, last time around they had it right. So, you know, hopefully this time they will too, and I'm sure they will.
Well, Steve, that's great that you had the minister over to watch him play soccer. I think that's hopefully he's told his fellow ministers the story.
Yeah, we're in kind of a unique situation on the island where you can do things like that, and it's probably like a 15-minute drive from his office to the soccer field. And I know it's not possible in some of the larger provinces, but like I said, it's great that he was able to see firsthand the difference that you know, this has made in those boys' lives.
And perhaps in Trinidad and Tobago, you might have, I don't know, I've never been there, but I know it's a lot smaller than Canada. You might have those close connections with your politicians in a way that you can speak to them a bit more freely than we can in our big cities.
Yeah. So we decided to offer this webinar because our understanding is you wanted to do some advocacy work on the short term. I understand you've been collaborating with some of the representatives from Roche, who actually alerted us, but you know, so this is your chance to ask a lot of questions, because we, as part of our twinning, we are planning to do more in-depth training around advocacy, but that would happen in the 3rd year according to our plans. So we thought we would accelerate the sharing of information with this webinar tonight. So this is your chance. Ask all your questions.
Can I ask, in Trinidad and Tobago, for patients with factor VIII inhibitors, do you treat with factor 7A and FIBA?
We have FIBA, but not factor 7.
So
I was now going to say I have 2 kids. So I'm a nurse. I work at the pediatric unit for our hemophilia and blood disorder patients. And we have 2 kids. They have factor 9 deficiency, so factor B, and they both have inhibitors.
that's rare.
So it's very rare. And they have been through ITI and still has very high inhibitors.
Well, you know, ITI doesn't work very well with factor 9 inhibitors.
Yeah.
But there's a new drug. There's a new
Okay.
drug coming along called fitusiran. It's an RNA interference drug, and it's been used it's still in clinical trials. It may not be perfect, but for kids with factor 9 inhibitors, there's no other solution really. So if you could get them on a clinical trial with fitusiran, that would be fantastic. It's really changed. I know some kids, I met one in Ireland, he was in a wheelchair and was severely depressed because he couldn't go to school. He was in very bad shape with factor 9 inhibitors. And fitusiran changed his life again. So that's something you could look into. If you have factor 8 inhibitors, I think it's really an easy case to make to switch them from whatever they're taking now, which doesn't work very well, to Hemlibra, emicizumab, and probably not cost any more, probably cost less.
Yeah, but we do have FIBA as well.
Yeah, FIBA but FIBA is expensive as well as 7A. One thing though, you can't use emicizumab and FIBA together. That's dangerous. There have been some blood clots, so they're really to keep apart. So if you used emicizumab, you'd have to use factor 7A if they needed something in addition.
Okay.
So any other?
So if you're starting somewhere with your advocacy regarding emicizumab, I would start with inhibitors, win that one, and then go to step 2, which is everybody else.
Okay, so we had given ourselves 90 minutes, so in case we ran over time and we needed more time for questions, so I'll ask one more time for your questions, and if there are none, we'll terminate the webinar. So this is your last chance to ask your question.
Hi, good night. I have more of a comment. I just want to thank David and the team for such an excellent presentation. It's really valuable information, and as you rightly said, could apply to other projects, not just Hemlibra. And in our situation, I think the cost of it is one of the major barriers we'd have to cross. So some of these strategies really jumped out at me, like having a unified front between the association and the physicians, because they would be very influential. The hematologists would be very influential in advising the decision makers in the Ministry of Health. So, and collecting our own data, which is a challenge we've faced, up to this point. So I think that might be a valuable exercise as part of the twinning, learning more about the data collection tools you all utilize, but more especially how you analyze and present it in a credible way to the authorities. Yeah.
Pricing is difficult, but prices are different in every country. So, if they go and look at the prices in the US and go, oh, we can't afford that, it's way too expensive. Really, that's irrelevant. You need to work, the company, in this case, Roche, needs to work in your context, in Trinidad and Tobago, with your budgets. They don't want to price it too high because they won't sell any drugs. They want to find the sweet spot where they can introduce the drug in a way that's affordable to the country. So trust them to work with the government and see if there's any way you can help them come to that negotiated middle ground with governments.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think, as you said, the process isn't as complicated, I would say, as with Canada in terms of the HTA and the different bodies involved. So, and we have begun, forming these relationships with the Ministry of Health, stakeholders, the decision makers for getting drugs on the formulary. So I think we're on the right track initially. So it's just to move forward from there.
Well, I'm really excited to see how you do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on that, as I mentioned, this is re-recorded. So tomorrow I'll send you a link where you can actually download the recording on your own device or computer. It's too big to send by email. So I encourage you to download it. I'll write to everybody that I have the emails for that were on this call. So I'll leave it available for download for maybe 5 days until the end of the week, let's say. And then after that, what we're going to be doing is transforming this into a YouTube, and that'll take a little bit longer. And once it's on YouTube, then I can share where you can find it. But for the time being, tomorrow, please download the recording. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording now.